The Rebbe starts off the Sicha by saying that it's known that the Chiddush of Matan Torah was that even though before Matan Torah there was also Torah being learned, as we know there was the Beis Medrash of Shem, there was the Beis Medrash of Aver, and starting from Adam Rishon there was also certain mitzvahs that they were commanded, and even more so when we speak about the Avos, that it says that they fulfilled all of the Torah before it was given. Nevertheless, what the Chiddush of Matan Torah was is that Yidden were then commanded for all of the Taryag mitzvahs, and it was given and commanded to the Yidden all of the Torah, to each and every Yid. Also, that Torah and mitzvahs was given from Anoichi Hashem Elekecha, from the very essence of Hashem, in a way, as the Gemara says, that Anoichi is Anon, Nafshi, Ksavis, Yehavis. Hashem says, I have given myself into, I have invested myself, put myself into the Torah. Says the Rebbe, since the Torah is nafshay of Hashem, and not nafshi ksavis yavis, and nafshay means, as Chassidus explains, the rotzin atzmi, the essential will and desire of Hashem. So it's understood that which is really an ikar, one of the principles of Yiddishkeit, that our Torah hazu, that Torah could never ever be changed. As the Rambam puts it, davar barur umefurish b'Torah, this is something clear and explicit regarding the Torah, that it's a mitzvah, medes la'olam u'la'olmei elamim, that it's forever and ever, never has any change, nothing is ever taken away from Torah, nothing can be added to the Torah. And as the Rambam says elsewhere, a Torah azois, ein chukeo mishpateo mishtanim la'olam, Torah and its mitzvahs could never ever change, forever and ever. Says the Rebbe, in regards to the commands and the Hoirois before Matan Torah, there were some major additions. As it was, for example, Noach compared to Adam, and then Avraham gets even more mitzvahs than Noach, and so on. The Rebbe says we could say, b'derech hefsher, we could actually explain that in the mitzvahs before Matan Torah, you could say, was mainly given for the benefit of man. In other words, it was more almost like you could say a means to an end. And therefore, there could have been changes, aliyos, within the Torah and mitzvahs that were given then, because there was changes in man, and therefore there was also changes in the commands of Hashem Kavayachol to man. However, by Matan Torah, which as we just quoted, that Hashem is nafshi ksavis yavis, Hashem is putting himself into the Torah, it's understood that the mitzvahs of the Torah now are not like a means to an end in order to get reward or even to refine the people or to be able to reach the tremendous great qualities of the Yidden being Hashem's treasured nation and Mamleches Koyanim V'Goy Kadosh, which then you could say that when there is a change in those fulfilling the mitzvahs, there's also some sort of change in the mitzvah itself. But rather, Torah and mitzvahs are really an end in itself. It's the goal in itself, because they are nafshi. They contain the essence of Hashem, and therefore, just like you would say, it's impossible to say that there could be any change in Hashem chas v'shalom. So too, there's no change in Torah and mitzvahs, as explained elsewhere at length. Says the Rebbe, since the nitzchi is the eternity in Torah is connected with the fact that it's nafshi, that it's Hashem has given himself and clothed himself in the Torah, this is the chochmah and the rotzoin of Hashem. So it's also understood and it's obvious that the eternity in Torah is not only in regards to Torah shebiksav, but also in Torah sheba'al peh. The Rebbe quotes the Rambam that Kol ha-mitzvos, all the mitzvahs that were given to Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai, which of course starts with Anoichi, all of the mitzvahs were given with their pirush, in other words, with Torah Sheba'al Peh. That's part of what's given to Moshe Rabbeinu from Hashem, along with all of its parts. Because, says the Rebbe, Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud, Agadah, even Masha Talmud, Vosik, Osid, Lahoiris, Lefnei Rabbi, even that which a diligent and proper student will eventually paskin and instruct in front of his Rebbe, was all said already, L'Moshe Messinai. All of Torah is really all one. And therefore, says the Rebbe, what would follow from this is that even the inyanim of in Shas, which are connected more with the nature of people, things like medicines and the like, since they too are a part of Torah Sheba'al Peh, so they too are included in this idea of Nitzchias HaTorah, that they are eternal, which could never ever change. Says the Rebbe, but according to this we need to understand that we do find regarding a number of sgulos, or even refuos, medicines, within Torah Sheba'al Peh, that we are told that Bizman Hazeh is different than in the time of Shas, and therefore we cannot use the same sort of medicines and so on, because nishtanu ativim, the constitution of the human body has changed, nature has changed, etc., and therefore we can't use the same medicines that were said back then. And the Rebbe asks, all would we be well if we speak about Isurim, that the Chachamim explain that they're to do with a particular sakana. For example, we have a din regarding leaving water uncovered. Chachamim said that this is forbidden in case a snake had some of this water, tasted from this water, drank from the water, and had left over some poison. So then it's understood that it's as if the Torah is saying explicitly that this Isur is only applies in a time and in a place where snakes are common. And therefore, the halach is that achshav nowadays, she'einu choshem mitzuyin b'neinu, where there are no snakes common amongst where people live, then it would be mutter. And so too in regards to other things. Just like we can understand that there's no contradiction to the nitzchias, to the eternity of Torah, to the fact that we find that there are certain mitzvahs and dinim that their obligation applies only in certain times and places. There's mitzvahs that are dependent on the day. There's mitzvahs that are dependent on the time the Beis Hamikdash exists. Mitzvahs that depend on Eretz Yisrael and so on. Because then Torah itself is right from the outset establishing a particular time and place, and this is part of the geder of that mitzvah. Just like the general idea we have of mitzvahs asay shazman grama, there are many mitzvahs that are just time related. However, says the Rebbe, when we come to the ideas of refuos and sgulos in Torah, which Torah did not say it's connected with a particular condition or a specific geder, a specific time and place and so on, rather they are just said, seemingly in an all-inclusive way, just plain, simple, that if you act in a certain way, then it's going to be a danger, and if you act in a particular way or a certain medicine, this is going to be beneficial for your health, etc. So the question now becomes, how can we say that it's not eternal and it doesn't apply these days? Or to the extent as it even says in some places that you're not allowed to use the refuos that are in Shas, just because nishtanu hativim, because the nature changed. How can we understand this if, again, when Torah said it was just said in a plain way, not saying that it's dependent on any conditions? So seemingly this too is part of the eternal Torah. It definitely is part of the eternal Torah. So how can we say it doesn't apply? In fact, says the Rebbe, some of the Mefarshim actually say clearly regarding some of these inyanim that since there's an isur on certain thing because of a halacha l'moisha misinai, so it cannot change because of the times. Because dvar elekenu yakum lo'olam, because Hashem's words are forever. So this is as far as the refuos in Shas are concerned. The Rebbe asks the same question in regards to the Rambam. In Hilchos Deis, the Rambam has a whole perek of how a person needs to conduct himself regarding eating and drinking and so on. The Rambam says, Hoyil ve'heyois haguf bori v'sholim b'darkei Hashemu, since the body to be healthy is part of the ways of Hashem, serving Hashem, so therefore, the Rambam explains all of these different things, how a person needs to act in a healthy way. Says the Rebbe, from the fact that the Rambam put this all into his Sefer Yad HaChazaka, Sefer of Halachos, it's understood that these instructions are not like the instructions of when a regular doctor gives instructions, where, of course, the ill person needs to follow them because of an ishmarta ma'od l'nafshei seichem, because the Torah tells us that we need to guard our health. But at the same time, the words of the doctor are not considered the words of the Torah. But in this case, when the Rambam puts it as part of his sefer, it's part of the halachos and the words of Torah. Especially that the Rambam doesn't just say, since the body to be healthy and whole, that the body should be healthy and whole, this is part of serving Hashem. Therefore, a person should distance himself from all the things that are harmful for the guf, and to act himself in a way that's healthy. And then he could have just concluded and said, look into the books that describe nature and medicine, etc., which things will be harmful for the body and which things will be good. Like the Rambam himself, in a certain sense, does do at the end of the Perek, where he says that if a person is sick, then he has to have other things other than what the Rambam is saying for a healthy person, as the Rambam says, as discussed in medicine, in medical books. But from the fact that the Rambam, for the most part, does not do that, he actually goes through in detail how one needs to eat and drink, etc. It's understood that these details that he does mention are considered halachos, words of the Torah, just like all other parts of the Sefer Hayad, of the Sefer of Rambam. The Rebbe says there's also another nafkamina, practically, when a Yid is learning these halachos, in Hilchos Deis, these things that are discussing of how one needs to conduct himself in eating and drinking and so on, So he's actually fulfilling the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. He's learning this Perek. Rambam is considered learning Torah. And he'll be obligated to say Birchas HaTorah before he learns it. The same thing is true when one learns the halachos in Rambam. In Perek Gimel, most of Perek Daled, in Hilchos Yisoidei HaTorah that describe the stars, describe the malachim, etc. And certainly the many prakim of astronomy and Kiddush HaChodesh, this is all part of Torah. And therefore the Rebbe comes back to the question, so it's not understood. The Rambam in his Sefer Hayad doesn't put in halachos which are only relevant to a particular time. It's only if it's going to be relevant in all times. And yet, amongst these halachos that we just mentioned in Hilchos Deis, there are many halachos, like the order of eating, which really are not fitting to these days because of the nature changing. So the question is, since the nature of the body is very much dependent and changes from place to place, from time to time, as it changed from the time of the Shas till the time of the Rambam, and this is why the Rambam himself doesn't bring many of these ideas of refuah which say explicitly in the Shas. So seemingly the Rambam should have also not put it into his Sefer, in the Sefer Hayad. He should have just given a general instruction that a person needs to distance himself again from things which are harmful, and in every single time and place, one should conduct himself with whatever is fitting then, according to medicine, according to nature. The Rebbe says an interesting point over here. The Rebbe adds, the Rebbe says, Al derech hatzachus yesh loymar. Al derech hatzachus, perhaps, maybe we could say in a more lighthearted way, we could say, that this itself, that the Rambam does spend all of these halachis on health, even though it's not going to be relevant in future generations. You might say this itself is telling us the importance, how precious a Yid's health is. That in order to ensure a Yid's health, even if it's only going to be for a few generations or a few years, the Rambam still includes all of these heroes together with all the other halacha. But the Rebbe is not completely satisfied with this. The Rebbe says it still needs clarification. At the end of the day, the Rambam should have at least said that all of these inyanim that he's discussing about health are only written according to the nature of this particular generation, this particular time, and not just put it as a simple halacha or plain halacha that's for all generations. Says the Rebbe, we can explain this. It's similar to what the Rambam himself explains in his Sefer HaMitzvahs. The reason why he enumerates and counts amongst the mitzvahs also the mitzvah of destroying the 7 nations. Even though seemingly it's not a mitzvah that's noiheges ledoiros. Usually a mitzvah that does not apply for all generations is not going to be counted in the count of the mitzvahs. So why are we counting destroying the 7 nations, which seemingly is something that only applied once upon a time? So the Rambam says that when a particular matter was achieved, in other words, we did the mitzvah and we accomplished it fully, and therefore it's not going to need to be done later, that's not what it means that it's not noyeg l'doiros. In other words, when we say a mitzvah is not noyeg l'doiros, it means it's a mitzvah that actually only applies to a particular time. But if the mitzvah is something that needs to be done, and you ended up achieving it and happening and finishing it off in a particular generation, that doesn't mean it's not noyeg l'doiros. The mitzvah still applies in every generation where there would be the ability to perform this mitzvah. If technically you can't do it because it was taken care of already, it's still counted as a mitzvah for future generations. The Rambam says the general rule for this is we need to understand that there's a difference between the mitzvah or the thing we're being commanded about. In other words, you can have something that you're commanded to do something and it does apply, this mitzvah applies for all generations, but practically you're not going to be able to do it because in a particular generation, the object of what the mitzvah is applying to doesn't exist right now. So therefore, going back to the 7 nations, just to clarify, the mitzvah technically applies in all times. If you got rid of them at a certain point, fine. So now practically you're not going to do that mitzvah. Says that Rebbe, seemingly we should be able to say the same thing in our case. The fact that we see that the nature of people nowadays, it has changed, and that this is why the medicines at the time of Shas and some of the things that the Rambam writes for health don't apply these days. So we might say this has nothing to do with the fact that this idea or this halacha in Shas and Rambam is a hira l'doiros. It is a part of the eternal Torah. In other words, there's no contradiction because we could say that yes, the instruction is an eternal one, but the thing that we're commanded about is no longer here or has changed. It's not the same guf that there was in the time of the command. In other words, the Rebbe is making a comparison that just like in the case of the Zayin Umas, they don't exist anymore and therefore we cannot fulfill the mitzvah, in a similar way we might say that the things that the Rambam and the Gemara said are all eternal, but practically the body is different and therefore the Hayrah is a true one. But we're missing that kind of body that we were talking about. The Rebbe says this might be similar to what the Rambam himself says, when he says to act in a particular way with eating and drinking, and he says, I guarantee, I promise, I'm responsible, that if a person acts in these ways, he will never become sick his whole life. And yet the Rambam immediately says, but that only applies to someone that is a healthy person to start with. It does not apply to a person that was sick from right when he was born or got himself into trouble in other ways, etc. But the Rebbe is not completely satisfied with this yet. The Rebbe says, even according to this explanation, it's still not 100% smooth. Because by the command for destroying the 7 nations or getting rid of Amalek, the Torah says clearly the thing that we're commanded about. We're speaking about the 7 nations, we're speaking about Amalek, that's part of the command, so we understand that if they don't exist, we don't do this command. But in our case, once again, in the wording of the Shas and the wording of the Rambam, there doesn't seem to be any conditions and any ideas implying that it only works if the conditions of nature, of the person, of medicine are in a particular way, and so on. Says the Rebbe, we could explain this, but by first prefacing another general idea regarding Torah and mitzvahs. It is known the cloud that Chazal tell us that the Torah Medaberis is really in essence speaking, Ba'al Yonim is really speaking about in the spiritual sense, in the spiritual realm, in the spiritual worlds. And only in other words, only afterwards, it is also a remez, it also is referring to things in our world. The Shalah elaborates about this. The idea being is that it's not that Torah is number one, meant, in essence, the way things are down here in this world, begashmias, and is only hinting to certain things as they are beruchnias as well. That the pasuk is speaking down here, and the remez is Ba'al Yonim. But it actually works the other way around. Torah, in essence, is really speaking about Ba'al Yonim, speaking about in the spiritual worlds, as they are beruchnias. It is only at the same time, it's also indicating and discussing things the way they are down here, begashmias. The Rebbe explains and elaborates. That means, of course, on the one hand, we say, Ein mikra yoytze midei pshutoi. That means when a pasuk says something, of course, it definitely has, number one, the literal meaning. And we can never say that the pasuk only means things the way they are beruchnius. There's always the simple pshat of the pasuk as it is translated and explained down here in this world. But at the same time, in the very essence, where is it all starting? Torah is really speaking, first of all, Ba'al Yonim in the upper worlds. This is regarding Torah. The same thing is true regarding mitzvahs. Mitzvahs, of course, are betachtoinim down here in this world. There's the action of the mitzvah in the literal, physical sense. But there is also Ba'al Yonim in the spiritual sense, the spiritual idea behind the mitzvah. And again, here we say the same thing. It's not that in addition to the mitzvah, the way we fulfill it in this world, the mitzvah also has a spiritual meaning. But it actually works the other way around. When Torah speaks about mitzvahs, number one, in essence, it's referring to mitzvahs as they are in the spiritual worlds, beruchnius. The mitzvah, the way it comes down in this world, begashmias, is as a result, it's a continuation. It's an expression from the way things are, beruchnias, in the upper worlds. As the Rebbe says, this is clearly in the Maimer Chazal that tells us on the pasuk, Magid Dvorav LiYaakov, Hashem gives his words and his mishpatim to the Yidden. So the Medrash tells us, Mashahu Oiso, what Hashem does. First Hashem does these mitzvahs, and then he tells us to do and to keep. In other words, first the mitzvah is beruchnius, and as a result of that, we have the mitzvah begashmius. And the Rebbe says, of course, it's not a contradiction to the klal, that hamaiso ikar, action is the most important point, is the most important thing. And so too, regarding the Torah, we have the rule, that Torah loy b'shamayim, that Torah is not paskened up in the heavens, because Hashem's desire is that the main fulfillment of the mitzvah should be down here in this world and in the literal sense. And Hashem wants that who should be the one paskening the halacha of Torah? It should be happen down here in this world, and loy b'shamayim, it's not going to be paskened in the heavens. So practically, it's down here is the main thing. But nevertheless, as far as Torah and mitzvahs in their original form on their own, it actually works the other way around. Where does it start from? The beginning of Torah. The source of all the Inyanim of Torah mitzvah starts off Beruchnius. There's a pasuk that describes how Torah itself is speaking, so to speak, about itself. The Torah is saying, I was Hashem's delight. Or as Chazal say, that the Torah was Hashem's precious treasure even before the world was created, and so on. It's from the Ruchnius that all the Gashmias, the aspects of Torah and mitzvahs, then come down. Or as the pasuk says, Min hashamayim dibarti imachem. Hashem is saying the Torah from the heavens. Min hashamayim ishmiaches koiloi. And then v'ala aretz. So it all starts off Beruchnius, and then it comes down through Ishtalshlus, comes down Begashmius. And therefore, says the Rebbe, all of the inyanim that say in Torah, their original or initial translation is number one in the spiritual world, Beruchnius. Says the Rebbe, now we could come back to understand in regards to the inyanim of refuah and similar sorts of ideas. When Torah gives a hira, when Torah gives instructions regarding refuahs, regarding medicines and segulos, etc., number one, it's speaking first of all, Ba'al Yonim, in the spiritual realm. That means, first and foremost, we're speaking about these ideas of how they are Beruchnius. And only afterwards, as a result from the initial thing that the Torah is speaking about, it's also being nishtalshel, it's also coming down and expressing itself in the physical world as well. As the expression we used earlier, v'roim zois b'shniyos, secondly, it is also a remez down here b'tachtoinim. Says the Rebbe, the way these things are beruchnius, all of these medicines are beruchnius, they are eternal, absolutely eternal. And because of their ruchnius, the kashoirish, and their benefit and refuah exists all the time. And simply put, the Rebbe says, all the inyanim of the guf, it's eating, medicine, etc., are all nishtalshel from these very same things of how they are in the soul. So regarding the eating and the health, the spiritual health of the nefesh, all of these refuos and sgulois, as they are in the upper worlds and beruchnius, they absolutely exist with the same full force in an eternal way, and there's absolutely no change in them. It is only as it comes down, be ishtalshlus into our Gashmi, the world, into the Gashmi, the body, here there can be a certain chiluk, there can be a certain change. When things are the way they're supposed to be, then down here, lamata, things are matching up exactly the way they are lamaila, and therefore those refuos and sgulos will also work and be effective, also in the simple sense of the word, down Begashmius. But when there is some sort of change, some sort of yerida, some sort of descent in the world, when the world is not completely matched up down here with the way things are lamaila. So then it's possible that these ruchniistic things don't come down into this world with their full shleimus in their fullest, and therefore there could be some sort of change regarding the effect as being a refuah, as being a cure for the body, and therefore these herois remain only in the ruchniistic sense. The Rebbe gives an example for this. The Rebbe says, we could say an example like we find in regards to spiritual refuah that we find by certain mitzvahs. So we know that in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, we had the idea of karbonos. And when a person brought a carbon begashmias, he had a kapara, this brought a kapara for him. And as the pasuk says, v'shav v'rafalo, he does tshuva, this is a cure for him, so this is a spiritual cure for his aveira. But when the nature and the situation changed, we don't have the Beis HaMikdash. Now, these days, in this situation, that refuah, that carbon refuah, doesn't help anymore. And in fact, we're not allowed to bring a carbon. But we could still get this refuah and kapara through bringing the ruchnis, the carbon, the idea of tefillah, the idea of tshuva, and so on. Says the Rebbe, it is in this way also that we can explain this peruk in Hilchos Deis of the Rambam. The Rebbe says, it is known what the Tumim writes regarding the words of the Beis Yosef and the Ramah. So he writes the following. He says, "Hakoil b'ksav miyad Hashem hiskil." Every word that the Beis Yosef wrote and the Ramah wrote are really all the words of Hashem. It is the spirit of Hashem that is inside of them, that was wondrous inside of them, so that their words, the Beis Yosef, the Ramah, and all of these great tzaddikim, their words are completely, absolutely aligned with the halacha and with the way the Eibishter wants it, even if not necessarily as they were writing every single word they had exactly that in mind. Nevertheless, the Eibishter made it that their words should be accurate according to the halacha, according to the way the Eibishter wants, and the Eibishter gave them success In other words, when they are writing these words, it's all the Eibishter's words. From this we understand, when the Rambam is writing these halachos, these anhagos, these conducts that ensure that the body should be bari v'shalim, healthy and whole, the same idea. Ruach Hashem noises obekirbi, it's really the spirit of Hashem inside of him, making sure that all of these words are aligned with the halacha and with the idea of nitzchi satayra, that they're all eternal. That means to say that even if a time comes when not all of the things that the Rambam is telling us how to act in eating and drinking, etc., are going to have an effect on the physical body, that it should be bari v'shalom, because the nature of the body changed because of the state of the world. And nevertheless, all of these erois are really eternal. And they do have their effect through the spiritual eating and drinking, as the Rambam describes. It has their effect in the nefesh adam, on the soul of the person, and their ruchni is the sense. And really, that's be'etzim, the real emes of the whole idea. Although begoli and beruch and bechitzonius, an external level, the Rambam was speaking about the physical health of the body, but really on the spiritual level, every single one of these things that the Rambam says really works and is applied to the nefesh adam in the spiritual sense. Says the Rebbe, this idea that the Torah in essence is speaking about spiritual things is really also relevant in the way a Yid learns Torah down here in this world. The Rebbe says, there is a one way of learning Torah as it's betachtoinim. That's more the idea of learning the nigla de Torah. There's also the way of learning limut of Torah, the way it's b'al yoinim. In other words, seeing the spiritual aspect of the Torah, that's the pnimiyus of Torah, which is really the main thing that the Neshamas in Gan Eden, what are they learning? They're learning the pnimiyus of Torah. And that is both as far as when you're learning the pnimiyus or inyanim of a halacha, you're learning the pnimiyus of the mitzvah, the hidden reasons of the mitzvah, etc., as well as when you're learning and understanding about, say, the ishtalshalos, the oneness of Hashem, etc. So this is what we tell a Yid, that even though, of course, the psak halacha we could only learn specifically and understand when you learn it in the nigla de Torah. A neshama beguf down here, lamata, has to learn the nigla, and that's the way you're going to paskan a halacha. But we always must remember that in essence, what's the Torah speaking about? B'al yoinim. The essence of the Torah is the way the Yid is learning even down here, but he's understanding the pnimiyus and the deeper ideas of Torah. And that also impacts and affects a oir, a light, an energy in the Torah. As it's coming down into this world, in the limud of Nigla the Torah, it's also infused with the pnimiyus of the Torah. And the Rebbe says simply that it actually helps the person, in addition to the fact that he has it be'amunah pshuta, but he also feels it, to be able to sense, to be able to feel in the learning of Nigla the Torah, as it's being learned down here, Lamata, it's clothed in Yonim Gashmim and matters of Adam Hazah, but he always feels that really, this is Chachmasi, that it's really godliness, it's the Chachma and Ratzin of Hashem. Says the Rebbe, by us adding in both parts of Torah, both in Pnimiyus HaTorah and Nigla the Torah, we are Zoichet to the Gili of the Torah of Mashiach, which then will be in a way that, as it says, Lo Yiyah Eisek HaTorah VaMitzvahs, that learning Torah and be doing mitzvahs then won't be primarily for Levaira Berudim, for elevating the sparks in this world. Rather, then it's going to be in a stage higher, and therefore it's going to be more about causing all sorts of spiritual yichudim, unions in the spheres, etc., and all through the Pnimiyus HaTorah. We're going to fulfill the mitzvahs with these kavonos alyonis, with these greater kavonos, and therefore the Rebbe is quoting over here from the Igeres HaKodesh of Tanya, and therefore the main involvement of Torah then will also be in the Pnimiyus HaMitzvahs, in the hidden reasons for the mitzvahs. And as the Rambam puts it in his sefer, which again is a sefer halachis regarding the limud HaTorah in the times of Mashiach, that Nisavu HaChachamim VaNeviim in Moisa Mashiach, what did the Chachamim get so excited about for the times of Mashiach and the Nevi'im, so they should be available, should have time to learn Torah and its Chachma. The whole involvement of the world will be Ella, only Lodas Esavaya Bulvad. Ulefichach Yisrael Chachamim G'dolim, all the Yidden will be very, very wise. V'yoidim Dvarim Astumim, knowing all the hidden things. V'yasigu Das Boidim, being able to understand the knowledge Kvayachlav Hashem, Kvikoyach Adam, according to what man is able to take. V'vias Mashiach Tzidkeinu b'meheira v'yameinu mamash.